Ever since the airing of The Walking Dead's Season 4 mid-season finale, Too Far Gone, fans of the show have speculated and even debated whether or not the governor could have been redeemed or saved. This question has also been the inspiration for many fanfictions online, as a timeline where Rick and Phillip join forces is incredibly interesting from a narrative perspective. Be that as it may, I'm going to attempt to answer the question of whether or not Phillip Blake could have been saved. And I think the very best place to start would be to begin with an analysis of his psychology. Now, here's a quick disclaimer. I'm not an expert psychologist, and I'm aware of the difficulties of diagnosing a fictional character's mental state, but I believe I can render a reasonable verdict on the governor's psychological reality simply because we've got a mountain of evidence to work with. And in my non-professional eyes, that evidence points towards Phillip being a psychopathic narcissist. Now, before I can give you my reasoning for this diagnosis, I believe it would be prudent to first define psychopathy and narcissism. Psychopathy, or psychopathic personality disorder, is an antisocial neuropsychotic disorder or personality construct which is characterized by severely impaired empathy and remorse, along with exaggerated and impulsive egocentric traits, which are often masked by superficial charm and the outward appearance of normalcy. As such, one can expect a psychopath to fabricate inauthentic relationships with people in the attempt to further their own self-interests. One could also expect a psychopath to have little to no remorse, along with the inability to empathize with other people. This leads the psychopath to be manipulative and also makes them more prone to violence. Their impulsivity also serves to meet their hedonistic and egocentric needs. Speaking of ego, the psychopath is also far more likely to have an inflated sense of self-worth, hence why most psychopaths tend to be narcissists as well. Speaking of narcissists, we can define narcissism as a self-centered personality construct which is characterized by having an excessive preoccupation with oneself and one's own self-interests, which often come at the expense of others. In mild doses, narcissism can be interchangeable with egocentrism, and many psychologists will argue that it is rather healthy to have some egocentric behavioral tendencies. But almost all of them will acknowledge that in extreme cases, out-of-control narcissism can turn into a personality disorder in its own right. Narcissistic personality disorder is when a narcissist has resorted to pathological lying and has also developed an unhealthy obsession with the self. This, in turn, impairs the narcissist's ability to function properly, while also potentially leading to a psychosocial disorder. By now, I'm sure you've come to recognize that this diagnosis describes Phillip Blake to a T. One of the first signs of his psychopathic tendencies is when he lies to an injured soldier only to gain intel from said soldier. That way he could then find the man's squad and eliminate them, just to take their shit for no reason whatsoever.
They're out there waiting for you. Exposed. Tell me where they are, and I promise, if they're still alive, I'll bring them in.
He then takes the man's head and places it in his man cave as a fucking trophy. This not only demonstrates that he has little to no regard for human life, but also that he has zero remorse. Killing those men was unnecessary. And even if it was necessary, one would think that a neurotypical person would feel some sort of remorse for killing innocent people. But no, Phillip not only shows zero remorse, but rather he keeps a trophy for himself just to stroke his own ego. Now, some of the governor's defenders would argue that he was just being a tactically brilliant leader. But fact of the matter is, he could have recruited those trained soldiers into his ranks. Having, quote, rescued their guy, it would have been easy to earn their loyalty and subsequently their human capital or valuable survival skills. This, in turn, would also grant him access to the exact resources he wanted from the get-go. The reason he murders them is because he wants no one to potentially challenge his authority from within Woodbury. Everything he ever did was to further his own self-interests. After eliminating the soldiers, we see Phillip lie to his people about the circumstances of how he managed to obtain new vehicles and military equipment. He goes on to tell the citizens of Woodbury that the soldiers did not have walls. This is a quick example of his manipulative tendencies. He actually doesn't want people to leave the settlement, because that would be less people to control and less people to shower him with praise. Hence, he conditions them to believe that Woodbury is a special place, that it would be crazy to ever want to leave it.
But they didn't have our walls or our fences. Fighters got there before we did. Now, the men had trucks, the trucks had weapons, food, medicine, things we need.
It would also be a mistake for me not to mention that he never really allowed people to leave Woodbury. The freedom to leave was ultimately an illusion crafted by a deeply possessive man. Here's another quick example of his manipulative tendencies. Instead of callously forcing Andrea Michonne to stay, he plays nice. He tells them they can leave anytime, that they can eventually have their weapons back, and that he's just trying to keep his people safe.
How you feeling?
We want our weapons.
Sure. On your way out the front gates.
Show us the way.
You've kept us locked up in this room.
You see any bars on the windows?
Turn your weapons. Extra ammo, food for the road, some mats, keys to a vehicle if you want one. Send you on your way. No hard feelings.
After recognizing that Andrea might be interested in him and interested in Woodbury as well, he manages to seduce her slowly over time.
So what's your real name? If it's not asking too much.
I never tell.
Never say never.
I'm sorry. Lost my wife. Car accident 18 months before all this. It's my daughter and me. There, you're always welcome here.
That's very kind. Thank you, Governor.
Phillip,
I thought you never told anybody your name.
someone recently told me never to say never, so.
Well,
Clearly, Phillip knows how to get laid. That being said, he then goes on to realize that Michonne is a threat who could expose him to the people of Woodbury, who know nothing of his loot runs, zombified head collection, or his secret lab. So he attempts to win her over by showering her with compliments, while also attempting to subdue her doubts.
That's a shame. We could use a soldier like you.
Lots of bullet holes. You think biters figured out how to use weapons?
They must have encountered bandits weeks ago. It's ugly out there, but then you know that better than anyone.
It's too bad what happened to Wells.
When Michonne tries to escape, he detains her until she manages to free herself from his entrapment. In response, Phillip runs to Andrea, feeding her a bullshit story meant to cause conflict between the two women. If he can't get Michonne to stay, he could try to separate the two, thus maintaining his influence over Andrea. When Michonne does leave, he sends his attack dogs to go find her and kill her. Not because she's a real threat to Woodbury, but rather because she's a threat to his power and ego. And eventually, even Andrea is hunted down by Phillip, eventually leading to her death, simply because the governor cannot handle any form of disloyalty. Even after his exile from Woodbury, Phillip continues to be an inauthentic individual. He doesn't tell people that his name is Phillip anymore, but rather he gives them the alias of Brian. Even when he has no need to lie, he cannot help but to bear false witness. After a loot run with his new group of survivors, he refuses to elaborate on his past to Pete and Mitch, while also being terrified of Martinez potentially outing his past identity. Fast forward to the point where he kills Pete because he disagrees with his leadership qualities. He then tells Mitch that he will now be assuming the role of leader, despite screaming to Martinez as he was killing him that he didn't want to be the leader. Phillip agreed with Mitch's mindset on survival, but instead of allowing Mitch to be the leader, he himself took on that responsibility.
Look, Pete, I know you don't want to hurt nobody. Neither do I. But we need those supplies. So let's just go there, take what we need and go. No rough stuff. You want to rob them? Why not? We need their stuff.
What did you do, my brother?
You were right about that camp. We should have taken their supplies. I don't care that you killed the old man. Men like your brother, always doing the right thing. Even if it costs their own people.
He does this because deep down he wanted that power back. His ego could not live without it. And when he converses with Herschel, he clearly demonstrates that he literally has no empathy for others.
If you understand what it's like to have a daughter, then how can you threaten to kill someone else's?
Because they aren't mine.
Also, before I move on, I want to briefly point out that his disregard for human life was overtly demonstrated when he killed his own fucking people. All because they failed him and dared to challenge his insight and authority.
What the hell are you doing? We need to dig in!
It's not worth it.
That was a slaughter!
Bunch of pussies!
This not only shows how little he cares for others, but it also shows how impulsive he can be. And, even more notably, how driven to violence he can be as well. All things being considered, it's painfully clear that Phillip is a psychopathic narcissist. But despite all of this, we the audience are teased with the possibility of him being redeemed in Season 4. He goes out of his way to help the Chandler family, almost dying in the process. After the death of David, he realizes he doesn't want to care for others and attempts to abandon the family, only until they convince him to aid them. And then he gets down to fucking Lily, and long story short, he ends up saving Megan, who is Lily's daughter. And as he saves her, he vows to never allow anything bad to happen to her again.
I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm never gonna let anything happen to you.
Now, it is clear that the governor loved his daughter Penny, and that he was never able to get past her death. But psychopaths, and even narcissists, don't love like normal people do. For Phillip, loving someone is transactional. Having a daughter gave him a purpose. He didn't actually love his daughter, nor did he actually love Megan, at least not in the manner that most of us would be familiar with. Furthermore, some people believe that the death of Penny is what caused Phillip to go crazy, and that his love for Megan drove him to attack the prison with a tank. But this just isn't the case. In his eyes, Penny was curable and alive in Woodbury. That is until Michonne domed her with a fucking katana. Despite believing that she was still alive, or at least curable, Phillip continued to behave the way that he did. This is precisely because he was always a toxic individual. There was no gradual decline in his character throughout the story. The man started off bad, and he only got worse. Like, I cannot stress this enough. Like, just remember when he believed that people could be cured, he was collecting the heads of fucking people. That's some seriously psychotic shit. The claim that Penny was responsible for his insanity would be more believable had he truly gone psychotic after Penny was unalived by Michonne. Fact of the matter is, Phillip was never a decent person, and his love for his daughter and adopted daughter is merely the illusion of humanity. This mirage of decency is what lulls us to believe that his redemption arc was even remotely possible. And, to Phillip's credit, he did seemingly understand that he was unwell. You could even argue that the alias of Brian was just his way of attempting to distance himself from his past self. The governor also tried to escape being a leader again. He tried to avoid, quote, caring for others again, and he quite literally did try to hear Rick's plea for peace and coexistence. But he clearly recognized or believed that he could not be saved, that not everyone gets to come back, hence why he responded to Rick's inspirational speech with a one-word retort.
Liar.
The governor could never be saved because he himself didn't believe it or never truly wanted it. And he was also irredeemable because, unlike Negan, he never truly believed that what he was doing was a just cause. He never did what he did for the sake of others or for the sake of a grander ideology. It was always fundamentally for his own self-interests. Whereas for Negan, he actually had noble intentions, which were ultimately tainted by the way that power and the New World had corrupted him. The governor, unlike Negan, never experienced a change in perspective or a sustained change in behaviors. Had Phillip joined Rick at the prison, it never would have been because he was redeemed, but rather it would just be another ruse to eventually exact revenge on Grimes and Michonne, the two people who damaged his ego the most, which to a psychopathic narcissist is an unforgivable sin. Plainly stated, the governor was simply too far gone, and this was something that was true from the very minute we met him. Anyways, if you enjoy this sort of content, please like, share, and fucking subscribe. Also remember that you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined down in the comment section. I'm Captain Gold, and I hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.